we are so fortunate to have Justice Earls as our primary speaker today. We are so fortunate to have her on the Supreme Court. Please, let's give one final thing. She's a graduate of Yale Law School. Her resume is, well, I could stand up here for the next 20 minutes, but I think we all have a pretty good idea of how fortunate we are to have her in Polk County and to have her on the North Carolina Supreme Court. Justice Earls, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Wow. Good morning, Polk County Democrats.
Good morning.
I am so thrilled to be back in Polk County. I have been campaigning since January of last year because this is a big state and I have a statewide race. So I am just so grateful to you all for coming out this morning. And I want to talk a little bit about what our court has been doing, how it's impacted you, and I want to leave you with the exciting and what I think really positive truth that we have incredible potential to make a difference in 2026. Justice Riggs and I view this as step 2 in a 3-step plan. In 2028 is when we can take back our court.
Yay.
So,
Get out the vote.
So as I'm talking about the challenges we face, remember that overall we have a path to victory and we have a path to getting back to a court that will enforce your rights. So let me just say a couple of words. First of all, love all the Anita Earls shirts. You guys are awesome. It does make a difference because while so many people know Roy Cooper, I mean, of course they do. He's run many times statewide. He's been an incredible governor. The name recognition and the support for me in the current polling falls behind his. And so just letting people know who I am and that I'm on the ballot will help tremendously. What I hope you'll tell people about me is that my career has been about protecting people's rights. And that's what it means to be a civil rights attorney. I stood up with people whose rights were being violated in one way or another, whether it was in issues of education, voting rights, employment, and tried to make sure that our legal system serves everyone, not just the rich and powerful interests.
All right.
What we face now, so I've been on the court for 7.5 years. And in that time, I've served under 3 different Chief Justices. Our court went from at one point being 6 Democrats and 1 Republican. Think about that. That was what it was at one point. And now it has completely flipped. January 2023 is when the court flipped to become 5 Republicans, 2 Democrats. The prior court, the 2022 court, ruled that extreme partisan gerrymandering violates your rights under the state constitution.
Yeah, that's right.
We ruled that if the General Assembly, in the Leandro school funding litigation, if the General Assembly will not adequately fund our public schools, it's the court's responsibility to enforce that right.
Yes.
And we ordered that funds be spent. We also ordered that the voting rights law, not the constitutional amendment, but the law that it required a voter ID was intentionally racially discriminatory. That was after a trial court heard evidence, concluded that that was the intent behind the law, and that under the state constitution in North Carolina, you can't put in place a law that is intended to discriminate on the basis of race.
No, that's right. No.
But then we had an election, and a new court came to power. So in 2022, North Carolina sent 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans to Congress, which pretty fairly represents how people vote in this state. New court comes to power. They say, we're going to rehear the redistricting case. And that's something that courts typically don't do. In fact, it hasn't happened in the over 200-year history of our court. But they said, we're going to rehear the case, and we've decided that we as a court don't have any power under the Constitution to protect your rights. We don't have any power to tell the General Assembly how to draw districts, and so therefore the General Assembly can draw however they want. And understand that 2022 decision was a nonpartisan decision. The court laid out 3 or 4 neutral measures that the General Assembly can use to make sure that your districts are fair to all the voters of the state. And it wouldn't matter if the districts were unfair to Democrats, unfair to Republicans. The point is, If they violated these metrics, they would need to be redrawn in a way that was fair. But when the new court overturned that decision, the legislature redraws, and in 2024, we send 10 Republicans and 4 Democrats to Congress.
Shame. Let's turn this over. Let's turn it over.
Absolutely.
Get out the vote.
And let me tell you, the other imbalance is seen in our legislative districts, right? So after the Republicans were able to draw however they want, in 2024, if you add up all the votes of everyone who voted in the election across the state, more people voted for Democrats for state house and state senate than Republicans. That's just the math. And yet, because of how the districts are drawn, Republicans have a veto-proof supermajority in the state senate. And right after the election, elect just one vote of having a veto-proof supermajority in the state house. So you don't really even have to be a mathematician to see that that is not balanced. That is not a fair democracy. That is not a system that allows the voters to choose their politicians. It is a system where the politicians are choosing their voters, right? So I also have to tell you what happened with education. Because as I go around the state, I promise you in every county, school board members and sometimes a lot of the teachers know to the dollar what they would have received, how much money they would have received under that Leandro order. And when the new court came to power, they put an immediate halt to it. They said to stop, don't implement that order. And then they sat on the case for over 3 years. And in April of this year, issued a ruling throwing the case out.
Shame.
Yes, again, a legislature the legislature not protecting our children's rights and the court backing down from its responsibility. So that means those funds will not be spent, the Leandro litigation is over. And what it means for our children and our schools, I volunteered with a program called Tools for Schools in Wake County, and what they do is they get private donations, they buy school supplies, and then teachers, public school teachers, can come to their facility and pick out for free the things they need. That program estimates, well, so what are they getting? They're picking up, because my job there was to hand out some of these school supplies, they're getting pencils and notebook paper and markers and chalkboards. I mean, just like basic things that you need to teach your students that they otherwise would not have because of the funding issues. So we know that our public schools really are in crisis, that we are in a fight to keep up that commitment that is in the Constitution. You know, in the first article of the state constitution, that's where it lays out all our rights. There we say that every child in the state has the right to the privilege of an education. That's the language. But we also have an entire title of the state constitution called education. And it lays out all the things the state is supposed to be doing to provide a uniform system of public education. So you might hear people argue, well, you know, that's Justice Earls getting out of her lane. You know, legislature is supposed to decide education policy, not the courts. Well, the point is that is misdirection. Of course the legislature can decide education policy, but this is a question of educational rights. And when it comes to your rights, that's where you go to courts to get them enforced. So if the State Department of Transportation wants to take your land to build a highway, and you don't think they're adequately compensating you for your property rights, you go to court. And the judge will, if they agree with you, order them to pay you money for the loss of your property rights. There is nothing unusual about a court ordering the state of North Carolina to pay money if it's necessary to respect the rights that are in our state constitution. So that's what Justice Earls and I stand for. We stand for a court that will protect your rights. And let me talk for just a minute about how it impacts your pocketbook. Because I think people don't realize we make decisions all the time that impact your life. So things like whether you'll be fairly compensated if you're injured on the job, whether you'll be charged more as an uninsured patient if you go to the emergency room, charged more than insured patients. We also importantly decide whether or not the Utilities Commission has fairly increased your electricity rates. And in a recent decision, our court allowed Duke Power to raise the electricity rates for the western part of the state, and that means people in this part of the state are now paying more for your electricity than people in the eastern part of the state. The Utility Commission's justification for that was that shareholders should get a 10.1% return on their investment rather than a 9.8%. That, I argue in my dissent to this opinion, I dissented, was that state law requires that the rates be set at the lowest reasonable rate. We're supposed to take into account consumers' needs. My opponent, Sarah Stevens, is a career politician, 17-year member of the General Assembly. She has received close to $30,000 in contributions from Duke Energy PAC. Okay? So it's not hard to figure out where she's going to be on that issue, but her career has also been about taking away the rights that my career has been about supporting. So everything from not supporting the rights of victims of sexual assault. She led the charge to put in a 12-week abortion ban in North Carolina. She's voted for the gerrymandered maps. She has voted for a racially discriminatory voter ID. And a couple of weeks ago, when I was in a debate with her, she was asked, as a member of the legislature, you're now going on the court, what should your role be when the laws that you have written or sponsored or voted for come before the court? Should you be ruling on those laws? And she said, absolutely, of course, I wrote them, I know what they mean. So in her view, it makes a lot of sense to have the person writing the bill decide whether it's constitutional in the courts. Actually, our state constitution sets up a system of checks and balances, right? We all learned about that in civics class. You're actually supposed to have an independent court that holds the legislature accountable to the state constitution. So when you're talking with folks who feel like they don't like either political party, they're unaffiliated, talk to them about the importance of checks and balances in our government and the importance of a court that will hold the legislature accountable to the state constitution, as well as the executive. That's our role. And right now in our court, we essentially have, we have former Senator Tamara Berenger on our court. We have Phil Berger Jr. on our court.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Do we really need a third Republican legislator ready to rubber stamp what the General Assembly does?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
That's why I'm running. Keep my seat. And as I said, there is great news because if I keep my seat this year, we will demonstrate that Democrats can win statewide judicial races, right?
Yeah, let's go.
And you did it in 2018. Remember 2018 was a blue moon election, no U.S. Senate race, a midterm. All of our statewide Democratic candidates for judicial office won in 2018. And some of the ingredients of that included dissatisfaction with the then newly elected President Trump. I think we have that in our elections right now. Yeah. We also then had candidates, Democrats running in every state house, state senate, U.S. Congress district, which was key to getting out the vote, but also key to communicating with voters and letting people know that the Democratic Party cares for the people of North Carolina in a way that the Republican Party does not.
That's right.
We put people above profits. That's what our party stands for.
Oh, yeah.
Democratic ticket! Great ticket!
And so in 2026, we have that again. We have Democrats running in every state house, state senate district, in every congressional district. I am so grateful to all of those candidates. I know the hard work they're doing, and some of them are going to flip some of these districts.
Yeah.
All right.
It's going to happen.
Let's go.
Go back.
Let's go. Anita.
So I just want you to know there is great reason for hope. There is a lot at stake. And you being here, you being informed. So what I want to ask you to do is, of course, contribute to my campaign, earlsforjustice.com. It's a grassroots campaign, $25, $50. It all helps tremendously. I have been looking now at the proposals for what it's going to cost me to communicate with voters across the state. And if you don't think every vote matters, just remember that Justice Riggs won by 734 votes out of over 5.5 million cast, right? Wow. And Chief Justice Sherry Beasley lost her race by only 401 votes. Again, out of over 5 million votes cast. So every vote counts, and I believe if someone contributes to a political campaign, they'll come out and vote, and they'll vote for that person they contributed to. So all of those contributions are enormously helpful. But I also want you to think about your power as influencers, right? You all know people who don't know me. You can talk with them about why our courts matter, why this election matters, what we can achieve together if we come together and work hard. And I give the example of my husband. So my husband is on 0 social media. I'm on 7 different social media platforms, but he doesn't want anything to do with it, right? when something happens that he doesn't like politically, there are 30 or 40 people who get a text from him, right? So you all have your networks. You all have the way you communicate with them, whether it's book club, whether it's knitting club, however it is. So think about reaching into the folks that may not be here today, but will listen to you. You are a trusted messenger, and you're now a very well-informed messenger. Let me also, just for a minute, talk about Court of Appeals, because that is our intermediate court, 15-member court. Right now, there are 12 Republicans and 3 Democrats on that court, and all 3 Democratic seats are on the ballot this year. So if we don't keep those seats, we'll have an all-Republican Court of Appeals. The good news about that court is that in 2 years, 5 Republican seats are up. So if we keep the 3 that we have and get a blue ticket through in 2028, we'll be a balanced Court of Appeals, which really matters so much because they decide so many cases that never make it. We decide less than 80 cases a year. They're the ones who are doing the bulk of the work when it comes to appellate cases. So Toby Hampson, John Arrowwood, and Christine Walczyk are Democratic candidates for the Court of Appeals. And so I urge you to make sure that people vote all the way down the ticket. Some 200,000 voters in North Carolina in 2024 voted for Josh Stein, did not vote for Justice Riggs. Right. You know, people go into they figure, I've done the top 1 or 2, I'm done, right? This is a test I wasn't prepared for. You're going to prepare them for it. Yep. And I encourage people to think about how the further down the ticket they go, the closer they get to their front door.
Yeah.
So vote the whole ballot, vote for judges, understand the importance of a fair and independent judiciary. Well, it's hot out here this morning. You guys have been fantastic. I'll take any questions. Anyone have any questions?
Justice Earls, thank you for coming to Copenhagen today. I think you're running the best judicial campaign I've ever seen because you're getting out, you're seeing people, they can see your sincerity and justice. You touched on this. Can you talk briefly about how our state constitution affords the people of North Carolina more rights in many respects than the U.S. Constitution, and why that's important now, given the Trump regime's assault on rights, the congressional assault on rights, and the U.S. Supreme Court's assault on rights.
So for those of you in the back, the question is, how does our state constitution provide more rights than the federal constitution, and how is that important in an era where we see the U.S. Supreme Court pulling back on our rights, the Congress, our federal government not protecting our rights? And so I talk about education, which is obviously an area that there is no federal right to a sound basic education. But it's also true that all sorts of other rights, North Carolina has a fruits of their own labor clause, and traditionally, state courts and state constitutions have been seen as sort of the laboratory of how we should protect rights. And so you can go all the way back to, so one of the basic fundamental principles is the notion that I've been talking about all along, that courts have the power to make sure legislatures, that their laws are constitutional. That was established in a case called Marbury versus Madison at the federal level. But in North Carolina, we issued an opinion, our state Supreme Court issued an opinion in a case called Bayard versus Singleton 13 years before Marbury versus Madison. So the principle that our court is meant to enforce your rights under the state constitution and hold the legislature accountable, that's actually been in our law longer than it's been in federal law. But we have seen state courts making really important decisions protecting people's rights. So several state courts have found a right to privacy, protecting women's rights, protecting more broadly rights to make decisions about health care options in a way that is no longer protected under the federal constitution. We've seen states protect voting rights. So the U.S. Supreme Court just ruled in a case out of Louisiana to essentially end enforcement of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The day before that decision, the state of Maryland passed a state Voting Rights Act to protect their citizens. North Carolina in the past has had a tradition of saying in the voting rights arena, saying that our state constitution provides more protection than the federal constitution. We said we can't have multi-member legislative districts under the state constitution. You can under the federal constitution. We said that judicial districts have to be roughly the same size. That's not a fact in federal law. So I could go down the list. I could talk about rights in the criminal process. All sorts of ways in which in the past our court has been willing to look to the state constitution and try to understand what did our founders want. And I want to just emphasize on that point this issue of our court being fair and independent and a branch of government that protects your rights independent of the legislature. You might ask, and people from out of state ask, why do we elect judges in North Carolina, right? In Virginia and South Carolina, so to the north and south of us, the legislature appoints their Supreme Court justices. North Carolina's legislature used to appoint our members. After the Civil War, when they were rewriting the Constitution, there was a sense that the court had become too captured by the legislature. And so in drafting the post-1865 Constitution, the 1868 Constitution, the wisdom of those drafters, they said, we want the people to decide who's going to rule on the issues that impact their lives. So this principle of having an independent court is one that is historically resonant. It's one that's so important. And in the short term, in many ways, our courts are our last line of protection for our rights.
Justice Earls. I have a question.
Chinese interfered with the 2020 election.
Well, so interesting question. What I can tell you is that our court is going to decide whether it was constitutional for the legislature to give authority over our local boards of elections to the state auditor instead of the governor.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty important question of governor's power versus legislature's power. That issue is pending before our court. And I think we've seen already some of the ways in which our boards of elections have become politicized that they weren't before. And I could talk a lot about the vote suppression measures that I see happening right now. In particular, the boards of elections, we have now done what the SAVE Act would have required. We have matched our voter rolls to Department of Homeland Security rolls. They've come up with some 1,600 voters that they think are not citizens. The Board of Elections has also sent letters to 241,000 voters across North Carolina saying there's some discrepancy in your voter registration because they've been doing this database matching. So I think the best way to protect yourself is to double check that not only on the Board of Elections are you listed as a registered voter, but also you have to go to the second part of the website that's about registration repair. And I don't know the figures in this county, but every county has had some folks who need to get either their last four of their social or their driver's license number connected to their voter registration database, because that's now a requirement to vote in North Carolina. And if you don't have that data in your voter registration file, they'll give you a provisional ballot. If you voted in the primary this year, you're probably okay, because that list was developed before the primary. The other thing I'll tell you, which not too many people know, but these so House Bill 758, which you might have heard about, it's a 38-page bill that some advocates are saying is a new vote suppression bill. It's passed the House. My opponent was the primary sponsor of that bill.
Boo.
What that bill does is it gives the boards of elections the power to challenge ballots after the election. That has never happened before, right? You're supposed to decide who can vote before the election, and then you let them vote. And then you count their votes, because that's how a democracy works. But now, if this bill passes, and unclear, but if it does, then after the election, county boards can decide to challenge certain ballots. But here's the key. They can only challenge absentee ballots. Now, when you use early voting, that is considered an absentee ballot. The reason they can only challenge those is those are the only ballots where you can connect the ballot to the voter. If you vote on election day, they cannot retrieve your ballot. So I just mention that because if you're absolutely positively sure you're a registered voter, there is some security in knowing your ballot will count if you actually vote on election day instead of early voting. And I know that's different. Most of the Democratic Party's generally been telling folks, do early voting. If there's a discrepancy, then you can fix it. So I just want people to be aware that there is that way to make sure that once you vote, a regular ballot, not a provisional, provisionals can be traced back to the voter. But if you go in on election day and vote a regular ballot, it can't be challenged because it can't be traced back to you.
Justice Earls. I guess I
Because
don't get
early
that.
votes, they can do it
Go hover over
within
there.
counties because
Go
early
hover over
votes
there.
are technically absentee votes.
Standing pretty close.
And so
I was
when
way
they
back
give you the
there.
ballot, your ballot is connected to your name, the same way that when you send in your absentee, it's connected to your name. Yes.
Question.
That bill has passed or that bill is pending?
It passed the House, it has not passed the Senate, so it's still pending in the legislature.
And it could be enacted before the general election?
So the question was House Bill 758. I was talking about the new vote suppression bill. It does some other things too, and I was just giving the status of that bill. I'm not commenting on it. I'm giving you public information about what other people have said about it. Because if the law comes before us, I would make my decision based on the evidence in the case and the controlling laws. But point of information, it has passed the House and it is pending in the Senate. Yes.
You spoke about the Board of Elections down here locally. I guess you are aware that one of the things that happened when they moved the control of the Board of Elections from the governor's office to the auditor's office was they required every chief judge in every county in the state to be a Republican.
Yes.
Now, I was personally affected by that. I would be very interested in knowing if there's any lawsuits around that I could potentially join.
So the question is, are there lawsuits around this issue of the Board of Elections being controlled by the state auditor? Yes, absolutely. The governor has sued. A trial court, understand this, a trial court found this law to be unconstitutional under the state constitution. It came to our court about whether or not the law could be implemented, and our court ruled, sure, go ahead and implement that law. I wrote a dissent saying that is just, again, not how courts typically work. If a law is being challenged, you don't put it into effect until you determine whether or not it's legal, right? And in addition, the fact that a trial court heard the evidence and said, no, this law is unconstitutional, yet our court said, Republican majority with dissents, our court said, go ahead and put that law into effect. That's when all the chief judges were flipped to being Republicans. So yes, there is litigation, but it's coming to our court, and I've told you sort of how our court's been ruling. So that's kind of where that stands. Yes.
Word is it that there'll be up to 20 constitutional amendments to vote on in November. Can you speak to that? And most of what I've read is that it's an effort to get more Republicans out to vote. Can you speak to that? And information. I haven't read any of the amendments, but can you speak to that?
Yes. So the question is, are there constitutional amendments that are going to be on the ballot? And I think that there have been discussions of 4 or 5. Some Republican proposals are still out there. There's some Democrat proposals. So one of the Democratic proposals to put a constitutional amendment would allow citizens to do initiatives and referenda, which, in other states where they don't like partisan gerrymandering, citizens have come together and amended their state constitution to prohibit it. We can't do that right now in North Carolina. Some Democratic members of the legislature have put forward a constitutional amendment that would, but it's not going to pass, right? But they have shown that we could amend our constitution to give citizens the power to propose by either initiative or referenda changes to the state constitution. My understanding, and now I'm just telling you what I've read in the papers, there are 3 constitutional amendments that have made it through the process and will be on the ballot. One is to limit the ability of local government to raise property taxes. The second is to cap income taxes at 7%. And then the third is to require that non-citizens or I'm sorry, that overseas citizens who have not who didn't actually reside in North Carolina. So if your parents are in the military, you're born overseas, you're still a U.S. citizen. You still have the right to vote in U.S. elections. In every other state, if your parents were originally registered in that state, you're born overseas, you become 18, you can register and vote in the state where your parents lived. North Carolina, in its wisdom, wants to amend our state constitution to clarify that no, you can't. They're called never residents. I think the number is about 2,000 people. There's estimates this would impact, but that constitutional amendment, I think, has been approved to be on the ballot, and I'm not sure the status of some of the others. I don't know that there's any data that this actually shows that it increases turnout. I'm going to tell you, I think it is the work that you all can do between now and November 3rd that will have the biggest impact in getting turnout, getting people to be willing to vote. So.
Get out the vote!
Yes, question here.
What kind of power do our courts have to stop them from sending people and seizing our ballot?
So the question is, given the speech that we heard from the president on Thursday, what power exists to stop the federal government from seizing ballots or registration data from North Carolina? And what I can say about that is, first of all, we've already matched our databases to Department of Homeland Security. We've already done a lot of what they've been talking about doing, number one. Number two, our State Attorney General, Jeff Jackson, has been very clear that he is going to protect the integrity of our elections.
Yeah.
And I believe there are a number of tools at his disposal, but I will also say that it was actually a federal court in Justice Riggs' election that stepped in. So understand, I serve with 4 Republican members of our court who ruled that the ballots of military and overseas voters be thrown out in the Riggs-Griffin contest, right? So people who put on a uniform and stand up to protect our country, we were not going to count their ballots. Fortunately, a federal court said that order by obviously I dissented. I explained why that was completely wrong as a matter of law. But a federal court stepped in, a federal district court judge, a Trump appointee stepped in and said, this is a bridge too far. You cannot change the rules of the election after the election, which is exactly what they were doing, in order to impact the outcome. And he ruled that order from our court violated equal protection and due process. And when he issued that ruling, that's when Judge Griffin conceded and Justice Riggs was sworn in. So I say that to say there are courts at the state and federal level who can have some power to protect the integrity of our elections. And I think that the best way to guarantee all that happens is exactly what you're doing here, showing that there is an informed citizenry who is standing up for our rights and who will not sit by quietly and let our democracy be stolen from us. So I want to thank all of you.
Winners don't change the rules!
The other thing that stops them is turnout.
That's right.
There's overwhelming turnout.
Thank you. So the final comment here is the other thing that stops both the vote suppression and actually can defeat the gerrymandering is turnout.
Yep.
Good turnout can overcome a bad gerrymander. So you have some power in your hands to make a difference. Thank you.